Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are joining us today. Say hello over the chat and let me present myself. My name is Paulina Sanchez. I am a long-term member of Plan for the Planet Foundation and a climate justice ambassador. And today I have the honor to host this amazing event, which is our Youth Summit Talks. This is a series of different talks that we've been preparing for you and that we'll still be having in the future. And this is with the intention of also keep us joining together before we gather on our great youth summit, which is happening every year. Today is the International Day of Forests. And this is why we wanted to create this youth talk on forest restoration, building climate resilience during the decade of restoration. You know that the COVID-19 crisis has resulted in an unprecedented suffering for people across the world, including the most vulnerable, among which children and youth. Apart from its effect on human health, the crisis has also struck us at a time where momentum on biodiversity and nature-based solutions were on the rise. Societal movements, among which youth groups, had mainstream biological diversity issues on the agenda of decision makers across all levels of governance and private sector, especially this year. 2020 was supposed to be the year where we ramp ambition and successfully launched into the decade of action until the pandemic struck. While we await for the curve to flatten and these difficult times to pass, we still have to steer through biodiversity and the consequences of the pandemic. As you know, Plan for the Planet and many other organizations around the world do amazing things, and we contribute as much as we can. But today I want to tell you about these amazing speakers that we will have today, and you will discover them. Among them, we have Ms. Susan Garner from UNEP, from Ecosystem Divisions. She's the Ecosystem Divisions Director. We also have Andreas Dahl-Jørgensen, which is the director of Norway's International Climate and Forest Initiative. We also have Mr. Alexander Shestakov, director of the Science, Society, and Sustainable Futures Division, representing UNCBD. We also have Ms. Njeri Kariuki. I hope I'm pronouncing it well. And she is from the Sustainable Development in the UN Forum of Forests Secretariat. And we have Ana Carbonell, which is also our director, ecologist and director of our planting area in Plan for the Planet, right here in Mexico, my land. And we have these amazing speakers today. We will be talking to them. They will be sharing their perspectives and their views. And of course, we want you to be part of this. So if you have any questions for them, please type them over the chat. And we will have some time by the end of this session where we will share these questions to our speakers. Great. So let's go ahead and let's not take any longer. And I would love to present our first speaker today, Mr. Andreas. He is as I told you, he's managing and the director of Norway's International Climate and Forest Initiative, and Norway's flagship climate initiative working to stop and reverse tropical deforestation. He has previously been the head of finance for an Indian rural solar energy startup. He has worked on climate policy as a consultant and started his career with the World Bank. He holds an MA in International Studies from Johns Hopkins University. And we are very happy to have him here. So please, Mr. Andreas, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Let me just share a few thoughts from Norway about why we're working on this issue and why it's important. It is clear to us, and the science is pretty clear, that it's very clear that we will not meet the Paris Agreement goals without addressing deforestation. The IPCC, the International Panel on Scientific Basis on Climate Change, is clear that in all their scenarios, we need to halt tropical deforestation, as well as restoring very significant forest areas around the world. In addition, forests are critically important to all, or almost all, if not all, SDGs. So often you hear people saying that, yes, forests are important for the climate or for biodiversity. It's important to preserve nature, but there's a trade-off. We have to choose between protecting nature and economic development. It is increasingly clear that we will not meet our economic goals without protecting nature, and tropical forests being the most important ecosystem that we have on the planet. So that's why we started working on this issue for about 10 years ago, and we have been allowed to plan for this to go on until 2030 from Parliament. And we work on this issue across a number of areas. We work with forest countries bilaterally and through the multilateral agencies like the UN or the World Bank. We support them in doing the policy measures that they need to do to improve governance and rationalize land use to allow for economic development without deforestation. So in addition, we work globally to help reduce the pressure on tropical forests from global commodity markets. So when you go to the supermarket and buy products, that you should be able to know that that product did not come from deforestation. And with the financial markets to make sure that the banks and investors of the world support companies in this transition. So what forest countries need to do to stop deforestation, and of course it varies from country to country, is to clarify who is allowed to do what where, right? So it's to regulate the land, to say, here we do agriculture and here we protect forests, and then put in place the policies across the sectors to make that possible. So that could be the agricultural policy or forestry for timber, it could be on energy, and of course the economic policies with the local governments as well. It is about putting in place the right laws, and it's about enforcing those laws. So a lot of deforestation we see around the world is illegal according to the laws of the forest country, and so we support countries in that work, both to clarify and to improve their policies as they want, and also to enforce those laws. In addition, we work with indigenous peoples around the world. Of course, it is increasingly clear that indigenous peoples are the best guardians of the tropical rainforest and have successfully protected forests for a very long time. And strengthening their rights across the world is a key area for us and others that work to protect tropical forests. And then I think an interesting element last year was we tried to support both forest governments and civil society and indigenous peoples, as well as companies and banks and investors and consumers and voters and youth around the world to know more about what is actually happening in the tropical forests. So we worked with partners to make a big purchase of high-resolution satellite imagery that we're making available free to the world. So you're all used to using Google Maps to navigate around the city. Now it will be more or easier to know what is going on in tropical forests, typically areas where there's been very little knowledge about what is happening. So that will help governments to track progress. It will help governments to see what policies work, and it will help advocacy groups and indigenous peoples and environmental defenders that are concerned about other actors intruding on their lands, and it will help companies that want to make sure that their soy or beef or palm oil or cocoa or rubber or other commodities that have a risk of contributing to driving deforestation are produced in a sustainable way. And then lastly, I mentioned our work on food systems and commodities as well as financial sector. But in addition, there's a very significant industry that is called illegal forest crimes. And so we are trying to work with Interpol and the UN Office of Drugs and Crime and others to better address criminal networks that are behind so much of the deforestation we see across the world. It's an industry that's been estimated to be on par with drugs, or at least part of the drug industry, and so it's a very significant industry that also undermines the rights of local populations and democracies around the world. So, I guess the question around what will it take to stop deforestation, right? It will take political will, right, from governments. It will take political will from the highest levels. It will take coordination across ministries and local governments and national governments. And it will take will from the market, and that's you. That's the consumers. And it will take an increased recognition that if we do not succeed, we will fail across everything we're trying to do. And this is not a choice we have to work on forest or energy. We need to do all of it, and we need to address deforestation in a very rapid manner over the next few years if we're going to have a chance to reach the Sustainable Development Goals as well as the biodiversity goals and climate goals. So thank you very much. I'll pause there.
Thank you, Andreas. And we have 3 questions for you. I'll read them. I read the 3 of them, and you can then answer them. One of them is from Thiago Zeude. He says, "Hi, Andreas. What are the lessons learned from your 150 million USD support to Gabon on tropical forests?" The second is, can NGOs working on afforestation, especially in the global south, be able to benefit from the satellite? And then from Leo Kuhlman, how do you think national supply chain laws affect the protection efforts on countries struggling with the protection of their primary forests?
Okay, so I'll try to take a stab at those 3. So on the last one first, national supply chain laws, I interpret in 2 ways. So both is on the laws in the producing country, where governments have made progress on legislation and policies that will reduce deforestation from producing those products. So, for example, Indonesia, where deforestation has fallen dramatically over the last few years, they put in place legislation and regulations that would, and a policy goal to expand palm oil production without deforestation. So those are national laws that help produce more commodities on existing lands without existing agricultural lands and outside of forests without leading to deforestation. Then there's also increasing attention around laws on the demand side. So the EU has been working on regulatory and non-regulatory measures to limit deforestation from their imports. Similar efforts going on in the UK, and now we see some US senators also tabling potential legislation for commodities that are sourced from illegally deforested area, according to the producing countries' laws. So all of them combined can help the leading companies that have made commitments to stop deforestation from commodity imports to succeed. In some ways, they are seeking such legislation because it can level the playing field, right? So that it can make it less attractive to compete with them with deforestation when they have made tough targets to limit it. Then the question, the easy question on accessing satellite imagery. So I think we can send a link in the chat. Maybe Gunhild, if you're on, that you can send a link to the landing site of the website. It's through there's a link through our website, nicfi.no, and there's also a link through Planet Labs, I believe is the place to access them for free. So these are monthly updated high resolution imagery of all tropical forest areas. On the first question on Gabon, so Gabon is a very unique country, right? It has, compared to its neighbor DRC, it has a very low population density, and it has almost exclusive forest cover. So more than 90% or 90% of the country is covered by forests, and they are committing to preserving almost all of that. So it's a very unique partnership, and we are making progress on the next steps in that partnership, which will include the first carbon payment through the Central African Forest Initiative this year for verified results that they have in maintaining a high forest cover and not starting to deforest. It's been a very interesting debate in this sort of tropical forest policy arena about how do you reward countries that still have high forest cover and have not started to deforest, if you will. Whereas most of the attention is around countries that have had significant deforestation and currently have significant deforestation. How can we reward them to reduce that deforestation? But it's equally important to avoid having other countries that have not yet started cutting down the forest to repeat that trend. And so that's why we started initiatives, or we had bilateral partnerships with Guyana in South America, and also with Gabon, who's making important progress in continued high forest cover.
Thank you, Andreas. We're running a little bit out of time, but I'm so happy that people are actually making questions. Can we do 2 more questions with you?
Sure.
Great, perfect. One of them is from Yugradna Srivastava. She says, youth organizations often have different level of formalization, often existing as volunteer groups, informal movements, etc. Would Norway be able to or be willing to explore how it can support youth groups on restoration as part of its funding schemes? Under the UN Decade of Ecosystems and Restoration, we are currently developing the official youth task force for the decade, which would comprise a lot of grassroots-based movements, which don't often have support they need. And the second question, the last one, sorry. Would it be possible to create a global law that prohibits non-sustainable palm oil in products?
So in terms of global laws, that is hard because laws are typically made at the national level. And internationally, there are important considerations when countries make international law, which is essentially treaties and such as the UN Climate Convention, deforestation from various commodities is an important topic in those discussions, including in the World Trade Organization and so on. So I think I don't see a law coming to ban deforestation from specific commodities, given that commodities are different. They're different in different countries. And country circumstances are very different. What I do see is an increased interest from governments to address the problem, both in producer countries to promote deforestation-free production, and from consumer countries to make sure that the imports are sustainable. Palm oil itself is not an unsustainable product. In fact, it's quite area effective. The question is where do you produce it, and how do you stimulate farmers to increase productivity on existing farms and so on, so that you avoid risking deforestation around that production. To the question around support for youth groups, so NICFI and other partners have various grants programs to support actors interested in addressing deforestation and promoting restoration. We have our own civil society grant scheme that we run from our development agency, NORAD, and we also have through our partners different grant schemes that they then on grants, for example, with our national or the national fund set up to receive Norwegian payments to Colombia or Brazil or others. They have also systems where you can apply for funding. So I just want to congratulate all of you for your leadership in as youth to get engaged in this important topic and to promote ecosystem restoration as well as preserving the standing forest. I do want to say that we are working on both, and I think it's important that we, in this decade of ecosystem restoration, also think about the standing ecosystems that are there that we need to protect. It's easier to destroy than to rebuild, and therefore, it takes 100 years or thousands of years to get a rainforest back, and it's really important that you also engage on the topic of protecting the standing forest that we have.
Thank you so much, Andreas, for your time, for joining us at this Youth Summit talk. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you for your inputs, and thank you for our audience for the great questions. So I want to say thank you and goodbye. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, you too, and good luck with everything you do, all of you. Thank you.
Let's move forward, and now we have another great speaker. So her name is Susan Gardner. She is representing the UNEP Ecosystem Division. She is the director. And let me tell you a little bit more about her. She has over 2 decades of experience in science and environmental policy, working for both the Mexican and the United States government. You heard that? It's 2 decades, over 2 decades of experience. Wow. Prior to this position, she was a senior official at the U.S. Department of the State in the Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs. Dr. Gardner's multilateral work included the strategic approach to international chemicals management, the Global Mercury Partnership, and the Stockholm Convention. She was awarded the Gold Medal for exceptional services from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for her contributions to the Minamata Convention on Mercury. Dr. Gardner created the first ecotoxicology program at the Centro de Investigaciones Biológicas del Noroeste. Her research has generated over 30 publications, including a book and a book chapters on topics related to ecology, toxicology, fisheries management, and species conservation. Wow, what a speaker. Welcome, Ms. Susan. Please take the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Paulina. And I'm really happy to have a chance to share some remarks. Happy Day of the Forest for everyone. I think that Director Andreas already made so many really good cases and strong areas for action related to the conversation about how forests are so important to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. But I would just like to provide a little more background on a few of the specifics on really why that's so important and the vital role that forests have truly in making the planet habitable. They're home to over 80% of terrestrial life on Earth, which is it's just a staggering number. And they're some of the most biological diverse systems on land anywhere. We know that forests are intertwined with our own health and our own well-being. There's a book called Overstory by Richard Powers, and he said, trees stand at the heart of ecology, and they must come to stand at the heart of human politics. And we know that there's no climate solution without the full contribution that we can get from forests. If forests was a country, it would be ranked in carbon dioxide emissions as the behind China and the United States and above the EU. Deforestation and forest degradation account for approximately 11% of carbon emissions, which is more than the entire global transportation sector, everywhere, all vehicles off the roads. So you can see the magnitude of how important this is. Deforestation also causes about $80 billion a year in the loss of vital ecosystem services. And it's so important that we think about the value of forests, not just in terms of the cost of the price of the commodities like the trees, but actually these invaluable services that they provide to all of us. The world's forests are fundamental also because they act like a shield, keeping humans safe from zoonotic diseases. We know that 1 in 3 outbreaks of new and emerging diseases, including HIV and SARS, are linked to deforestation and changes in land use. So, for example, the capacity of bats to act as a transmitter of zoonotic diseases increases with the loss of forest habitat. And while the cost of deforestation to prevent the spread of zoonotic or reducing deforestation to prevent these kind of zoonotics is substantially less than the economic consequences and the consequences of loss of human life. So investing in forests can tackle both the climate and the biodiversity crises together. And forest conservation and restoration together can deliver mitigation benefits of about 5 to 6 gigatons per year, which is enormous. So it's a win-win for things like stimulus investment. And it could be a backbone of COVID recovery efforts, especially in rural economies and developing countries. They can create millions of jobs and provide not just the short-term relief, but the long-term sustainable growth that's so important to everyone's future. An annual investment of about $1 million in forest management can generate somewhere between 500 and 1,000 jobs in developing countries. And for every job that's created related to forestry, you can generate up to 3 jobs in the wider economy. So it's just really important that all ministries have the information to understand what value really is in forest restoration and preventing degradation. Restoring 300 million hectares of degraded forests is a business opportunity estimated at $175 billion per year. Drastically reducing deforestation and helping with restoring forests and other ecosystems is truly the largest single nature-based solutions opportunity for climate mitigation. But despite this, and their enormous potential, they've really only received about 2% of the climate finance to date. And this is something that definitely needs to change. And 2021 can be that year where we begin to make peace with nature. And the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, I was glad to see there was questions about that. It's a powerful political convener to really increase support to recover forest ecosystems that have already been lost or degraded, and to promote their sustainable use. Now, the Green Gigaton Challenge, I hope you've heard of this. It proposes a public-private bid to mobilize funds for transacting at least 1 gigaton of emissions reductions from forests per year by 2025. And this would send an unmistakable signal of ambition. It could be a powerful force to help change economies and politics related to deforestation and restoration across many parts of the world. It would help to ensure that 2021 becomes that year where we went from the era of negotiations to a true decade of action. And governments have a key place in terms of enabling conditions for forest conservation and restoration. Governments are critical, we know, in setting the rules of the game. So we don't want to underestimate how important it is to preserve forests, to restore forests through legislation, through regulation, through law enforcement. Director Andreas gave a lot of examples of that. They provide the rules of the game and bring on board private sector participation as well, including things like deforestation, free supply chains, and financial vehicles to promote investment. So I think Andreas made that point really well. They can also be the pillar for NDC ambitions. So governments really have a legitimate vehicle to propose and increase mitigation ambitions. Whether we stay within the 2-degree target, or even better, the 1.5-degree target, depends very much also, though, on civil society participation. And change is really unlikely to occur unless citizens express a clear demand for change, and that becomes a really strong political voice. And I think we can't underestimate how important it is to have the youth involved. We can't do this without young people. And I really appreciate the chance to have this conversation today, because the trees that we plant today are going to grow large, while the youth that are in this meeting are growing older and are taking over the reins of governance. So landscapes and forest restoration, they require a very long-term vision. And because of that, the youth have a special role to play as stewards and the maintainers of the projects that are implemented as part of the upcoming decade on ecosystem restoration. Much will depend on intergenerational change that takes place as the young people advance in their careers and begin to occupy positions of powerful. And I have to say, I personally am very, very hopeful about what that change is going to look like, because the strong participation today of youth can help to ensure systemic change tomorrow. So just in conclusion, now is the time for action. And today's session provides a chance to ask, what can we do that is bold and concrete to unleash the forest potential? We're thinking in terms of intermediate goals, like, by 2025, we should be on a clear path to achieve the full contribution of forests to climate change. This means being about halfway to our goal on the 5 gigatons per year in mitigation benefits from restoration and reduced deforestation. But also in the short term, the intermediate kind of milestones, we need to be very bold and think of concrete actions to unleash forest potential for climate and biodiversity and COVID recovery efforts. But we need something that sends a clear signal now to Glasgow. COP26 should find us having committed funding to support the first gigaton of high quality emissions reductions and carbon capture. And we need this type of unmistakable signal of our ambitions to really move towards transformational change of a whole of society approach. UNEP, in collaboration with a wide range of partners, is really looking for these kinds of transformational solutions to truly scale up forest conservation and restoration. So I strongly encourage all of you to engage in the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And this will be launched on World Environment Day this year. It's no small task, but it can catalyze action. And I think it's really important to remember that restoration is something that can happen at any scale, whether it's your backyard, a river valley, a national forest, or a global threatened ecosystem. Everyone should do something with the tools that you have. So I encourage you all to support the efforts that are aimed at forest conservation and restoration and sustainable use through the UN RED program, through the Green Gigaton Challenge. And I just finally like to leave a message for youth participating today with some concrete actions. And those are learn, join, get involved, and talk. Learn about the threats of climate change and our mitigation options. Understand what this means. Join in whatever existing effort is in your community or your city or your county on forest conservation and restoration, and get involved in political debates. Make sure that your opinion is known and that your voice is heard. Talk to your friends, talk to your family and others in your network, because we need all of your engagement. This is your decade, and this is your actions and your passions. It's going to be so instrumental in making this a success, because it is 100% possible to turn this moment of crisis now into the moment of hope for our planet. Thank you. Thank you, Paulina.
Wow. Thank you for those beautiful last words. Really. I take with me what you said, that forest conservation and restoration is something that can happen at any scale. We can make it happen too. So follow Miss Susan's task. Just learn, join, get involved, and talk. Thank you, Susan. And for all of you, I've seen that you're posting your questions. Thank you so much. We're going to change a little bit the dynamic now. We're going to take the questions by the end. So we're going to listen to our next 3 more speakers, and then we'll take the questions. We're going to move ahead now, and we're going to have our third speaker, Mr. Dr. Alexander Shestakov. Alexander Shestakov has a PhD in physical geography, landscape sciences, and environmental management, and a master's in land and environmental law from Moscow State University. He has various experience working in the field of environment and policy for academia with government, the private sector, and environmental NGOs. Mr. Shestakov has done research on global environmental problems and environmental management at the Institute of Geography's Russian Academy of Sciences, and worked with international consultancy companies on EIA and environmental audits. Since March 2018, Dr. Shestakov has been the director of the Science, Society, and Sustainable Future Division in the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity in Montreal, Canada. And we're very, very happy to have him here. Welcome, Mr. Andreas. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Paulina, and good time of the day for everyone. Dear participants, I am pleased to join you today to celebrate collectively the International Day of Forests and deliver a message on behalf of the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, Ms. Elizabeth Maruma-Mrema. I'm happy to have this opportunity to be together with young people to discuss the critical role that forest ecosystems and forest restoration play in building a sustainable and better world, and to highlight the role of you, the youth, in ensuring that we can live in harmony with nature for current generations and generations to come. The theme of this year's International Day of Forests, Forest Restoration, a Path to Recovery and Well-Being, could not be more fitting. 2021, as you already heard and know well, is the first year of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, of which forest restoration is a major component. It's also the year when the world begins to recover from a global pandemic, looking at ways and means to build back better and how to avoid, or at least to reduce, the risk of future pandemics and better protect human health while supporting a healthy planet. This is also a year when governments and stakeholders will make crucial decisions for the future benefits of nature and people. Susan told us already a lot about the role of forests, but we probably can continue this list, how they are important. And also we need to remember that currently we have basically health, climate, and biodiversity crises. And they are closely interconnected. And to a great extent, they have actually the same root causes. And thus, they must be addressed jointly. And forest restoration represents one of the major pathways on the road to solving this triple crisis. Forests, as you know, still cover 30% of Earth's, at least a land surface, right? And providing critical habitats for a great variety of species and ecosystem functions and services. And forest ecosystems support the well-being and livelihoods of over 1.6 billion people, and including more than 2,000 indigenous cultures. But forests, like any other ecosystems, have been disturbed by human activities for centuries through large-scale deforestation and habitat conversion, agricultural and livestock expansion, over-harvesting of forest resources, and illegal trade in species. The global number of trees is huge. It's actually estimated to be about more than 3 trillion trees. But over 15 billion trees are cut down each year. And because the climate is changing, trees are dying and not resprouting in areas that are becoming too dry or too hot or too wet to support them, thus basically transforming the landscape at a large scale. This may require decades or even centuries to recover. Collectively, we must act to stop forest degradation and to restore the share of forest land that has been lost or degraded over time. Among other restoration initiatives, tree planting initiatives around the world have responded to this challenge. Initiatives like Plant for the Planet know how to efficiently plant, grow, and monitor trees in ways that not only sequester carbon, but preserves and restores valuable ecosystems and their functions. Actors involved in tree planting initiatives must look beyond the number of trees being planted. They must plan restoration projects in a long-term and sustainable manner, and they need to monitor their implementation while simultaneously considering their impacts on biodiversity and ecosystems. Protecting an existing tree is actually better than planting a new tree. Through various decisions, parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity have emphasized the importance of taking a holistic, and we call it ecosystem approach, including with regards to restoration. As the saying goes, we should make sure that we don't lose sight of the forest for the trees. Trees planted must not be an individual, not just self-sustained entities, but part of a wider system of diversity that includes other trees, many other plants, and animal species. Not to mention, of course, soils and their microorganisms, absolutely essential for the tree's development. To guarantee that all those elements are integrated, we must ensure that we not only plant as many trees as possible, but that they are the right trees and in the right places. Without restoration, we will not achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And thus, all 196 parties to the convention have emphasized the importance of restoring ecosystems. The previous strategic plan for biodiversity for the period 2011-2020 included a global target for restoration of 15% of degraded ecosystems worldwide. And the new global biodiversity framework for the post-2020 period, currently under negotiation, as you know, sets ambitious goals that will only be achievable with the help of restoration. To reach this ambitious target, we need adequate finance, and probably at a much higher rate than today. And also the international transfer of finance and technology to developing countries. Protecting existing forests and restoring degraded forests and other ecosystems could represent as much as 30% of the solution to climate change. Restoring 350 million hectares of degraded land between now and 2030 could take between 13 and 26 gigatons of greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. It also could generate, as estimates, of course, but about over $9 trillion in ecosystem services. And in fact, it's estimated that for every $1 invested in the tree restoration, people can earn up to $30 in direct benefits. Trees are direct economic assets for people who build their livelihoods on timber or fruits or any other non-timber products that forest provides. Forests provide water reservoirs for communities, regulate water supply, keep soil fertile, boost crop yields. And even just when we walk in the forest, we benefit from it. Even though sustainable use of biodiversity is included into many national biodiversity strategies, almost by all countries, unsustainable use and overexploitation remain major threats to biodiversity. Illegal logging and illegal harvesting of forest products are serious problems, costing as you already heard also from Susan, billions of dollars per year. Sustainable use is a key concept under the convention. Back to 2004, all CBD parties adopted what we know as Addis Ababa principles and guidelines for sustainable use of biodiversity, a set of 14 global principles that apply to all activities and areas. Parties also adopted a global plan of action on customary sustainable use as a major component of the program of work on traditional knowledge and the role of indigenous peoples and local communities. Sustainable activities can be applied through many on-ground actions. That may include organic farming, agroforestry, sustainable forest management, management of protected areas, environmental impact assessment, certification, eco-labeling, tourism, just to name a few. Sustainability can only be achieved through participation and involvement. Taking action on the ground must be planned and implemented hand in hand with indigenous peoples and local communities within the framework of rights, ethical principles and values, local governance, and respecting roles of women, men, and youth. Young people should be among key actors in the fight against biodiversity loss. They have immense potential to contribute to forest restoration initiatives at all levels. Youth, with basically your hands-on approach, can translate global goals into local actions. And youth can contribute to a better understanding of the value of forest ecosystems. As I think Susan mentioned already, the time horizon for forest restoration is 30-50 years. So if you're planting trees now, you will see them grow, and you also, as well as future generation, will reap the benefits those trees provide. Youth can help hold governments accountable for monitoring progress in the implementation of their forest-related commitments at all levels. Youth can make their voices heard, whether it's in social media or in the street, influence consumption and production patterns, and encourage investment in agroforestry, ecotourism, any other sustainable approaches. Youth can also partner with your government to craft policies that reflect your desires and priorities. Indigenous youth play a fundamental role in their local communities. They acquire and master skills, knowledge, and techniques passed from previous generations to management and to nurse forest. And a new generation of indigenous scientists is actually building bridges between what we know as traditional knowledge and science. Governments and formal institutions must include young people in their decision-making process and implementation initiatives. They must listen to their multiple voices and provide the necessary financial and technical support to ensure full and effective engagement. The voices of youth are being heard in all CBD negotiations and in the preparation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Parties to the CBD are actually listening to youth. And in fact, we can see more and more that some youth have been nominated by their governments to be party representatives in official delegations attending meetings under convention. This conversation we must continue after the adoption of post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And to this effect, I like to invite young people to join Global Youth Biodiversity Network and partake in their online consultations and trainings on the CBD and the post-2020. I look forward to seeing even greater engagement by young people in finding solutions and taking actions to biodiversity and forest restoration, including engagement in Plan for the Planet. On 22nd May this year, the theme of the International Day for Biodiversity is "We are part of the solution," emphasizing hope, solidarity, and importance of working together. The International Day of Forest provides an excellent opportunity to unite stakeholders, including youth, to find solutions to restore our forests in a sustainable way. It provides an opportunity to remind ourselves of the many ways we connect with trees and forests, when we read a book, or we enjoy the protection of a wooden house, drink a glass of water, or even when we take a medicine for a fever. So together, we can find and implement solutions to ensure that our generation, your generation, and next generation will have actually the same connections to forests and trees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. Thank you so much for your words, and especially for me and my friend Gardner Srivastava, thank you for the shout out to youth constituencies, especially for Indigenous youth. And do take Mr. Alexander's advice and go check the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. It's a great community. And this is the best way, as he said, to be heard, because CBD processes are actually hearing the youth. Thank you so much, Alexander. And again, we see all your questions and all your messages. We are gathering all together for the end of the session, for our Q&A session. We're going to move forward to our next speaker. Thank you so much for being here. Miss, I would like to know if I'm pronouncing well your name, Miss Njeri Kariuki.
Yes, yes, you are.
Welcome, welcome. Let me introduce her to you. She is a Sustainable Development in the UN Forum on Forests Secretariat. The UNFFS, whose main areas of responsibility include supporting the intergovernmental forests policy dialogue through the forum. Ms. Njeri also serves as the major group focal point on the forum secretariat in processes focused on sustainable forest management implementation. Please, first of all, thank you so much for being here again. Take the floor.
Thank you so much, Paulina. And first of all, I'd like to thank Planet for inviting the Secretariat to participate in this webinar. And I'd like to also wish all the participants today a happy International Forest Day. The Forum Secretariat is very pleased to participate under the topic Intergovernmental Processes on Sustainable Forest Management. And as Paulina mentioned in her introduction, and I think was also stressed by the previous speakers, the COVID-19 pandemic has, of course, disrupted human lives, livelihoods, and economies at an unprecedented scale. And the pandemic has exposed the systematic vulnerabilities and inequalities as the most vulnerable segments of society have had to bear the brunt of increased poverty, reduced incomes, and food insecurity. The Forum on Forests, the UN Forum on Forests, was the first intergovernmental process to take concrete steps to assess the impact of the pandemic on forests. And in order to do so, member states of the forum decided that they needed to have a broad overview of the impact of the pandemic on forests, also on forest-dependent people, and to be able to assess the potential of forests to diminish the adverse effects of the pandemic on the forest sector. So at UNFF 15 last year, the member states asked the Forum Secretariat to compile an initial assessment of the impact of the pandemic and to present the findings of this assessment back to the Forum, to the member states at its 16th session, which will be taking place next month. Now, in carrying out the assessment, the Forum Secretariat has been working with UNFF national focal points at the ministerial level at governments, focusing on the impacts, but also the implications of the pandemic on the status of forest management, the livelihood of forest-dependent people, indigenous people, local communities, smallholder forest owners, workers, women, and youth. We've looked at the assessment. We've also looked at how the impact of the pandemic on the forest sector, including institutional capacities at all levels, regional, sub-regional, national, and sub-national levels. The assessment has also looked at the impact on forest industries, the labor market and employment, as well as domestic and international demands for forest products and services, investment and financing, both public-private financing and foreign direct investment, and also its effects on international and regional cooperation on forests and forestry issues. To do this work, we have mainly worked at the ministerial levels, at the governments, with the UNFF national focal points. We've encouraged and wherever possible conducted stakeholder consultations to ensure that the views and inputs from major groups, civil society, academia, NGOs, youth, women, indigenous peoples have been incorporated into the findings of the assessment. The UNFF Secretariat has also been actively involved in the collective effort within the UN system-wide response to COVID-19. So following the outbreak of a pandemic, the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, which houses the Secretariat, launched a series of policy briefs looking at the economic and social impact of the pandemic. And as part of this series of policy briefs, the Secretariat prepared 2 policy briefs, which are available on our website. One of them is on forests at the heart of a green recovery from COVID. It was published in June last year. And another is on financing sustainable forest management as a key component of sustainable recovery from the pandemic, which was published also in November. Both these policy briefs serve to provide analytical and evidence-based input to policy dialogue and decision-making at global, regional, and national levels. And they also serve to facilitate dialogue. The UN Secretariat, in the process of facilitating this dialogue, also organized a webinar on forests and COVID in conjunction with the high-level segment of the UN General Assembly last September. And this was aimed to further actively contribute to this work. We've also contributed to the work or the joint statement provided by the Collaborative Partnership on Forests, which we are a member of, together with the CBD, FAO, UNEP, and other forest-related agencies and entities. And this joint statement is titled Towards a Sustainability Forest Solutions in Response to the COVID-19 Pandemic. Now, before I conclude, I'd like to highlight some of the key points stemming from the deliberations and the assessment work. Firstly, sustainable forest management can make significant contributions to offset many of the social, economic, and environmental impacts of the pandemic, as has been mentioned by both Alex and Susan. Healthy forests are vital to addressing many pandemic-induced challenges, including economic recession, increased poverty, and widening inequalities. The forest sector has a proven track record in employment generation. And this was, I think, mentioned by Alex. And this is due to the combination of labor-intensive work and also relatively low capital investment requirements. Some countries, as was evidenced by the assessment findings, have already made forests an integral element in their COVID recovery plans by pledging to create new jobs in afforestation, reforestation, and agroforestry. The second point I'd like to highlight is that the pandemic entails a broad range of threats to natural ecosystems, including deforestation and forest degradation. The protection of natural ecosystems, including forests, reduces the risk of future pandemics and must be prioritized through renewed commitment to internationally agreed forest-related goals and targets. Thirdly, the value of forests to preserving biodiversity, regulating climate, and supporting livelihoods is, of course, undeniable. And sustainable forest management provides essential products and services to support healthy livelihoods during times of crisis. Forests and ecosystem services are essential for building resilience and providing safety nets for the most vulnerable communities. The fourth point is the fact that investing in forests offers nature-friendly solutions for sustainable COVID-19 recovery, while providing long-term benefits to tackle water scarcity, climate change and building energy and food security. At the national level, it's important that countries integrate forestry investment into their national recovery strategies. At the international level, official financial flows to forestry, in particular ODA, is now more important, along with technology transfer, multi-stakeholder partnerships, and capacity development. Fifthly, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development provides a framework to guide COVID-19 response and recovery efforts to alleviate immediate suffering in the short term, while also ensuring that no one is left behind, and also to transform development pathways for long-term sustainability. To strengthen our health systems also, and to improve livelihoods and foster economic growth, we need to recover better towards achieving sustainable development goals. Sixthly, the pandemic has highlighted the close interrelationship between the health of ecosystems, as Susan stressed, and the health of people. And it's become evident that humanity is an integral part of nature. Therefore, one planet, one world, and one life for all. So we need to work towards a new development paradigm that integrates care for people and the planet based on the One Health approach to addressing the global challenges. And finally, I'd like to stress the fact that the UN Forum on Forests is uniquely positioned to address all these issues related to sustainable management of all types of forests. And the UN Strategic Plan for Forests, adopted in 2030, I should say, which is fully aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, provides a solid basis for concerted actions towards a greener, fair, and resilient recovery from COVID and beyond. So it's therefore critical to integrate forest-based solutions into COVID recovery strategies, stimulus packages, and action plans. And I thank you so much, Paulina.
Thank you, Ms. Njeri. Thank you for your lovely words. Thank you so much. It was great to hear you and to know what you're doing. And we're a little strict on time now. And our next speaker that I had the great honor to meet a couple of months ago. Her name is Ana Carbonell, and she's the director of our planting area here in Campeche, the planting area of Plant for the Planet. She's going to talk to us about youth foresters and challenges and opportunities, and how planting trees today can help us have a better future.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I am really glad to be able to participate. And everything that we have heard today has been really interesting. It's like different positions and about like how government can help and how other institutions and organizations can help us to try to fight against all these climate crises. I'm going to change a little bit and explain you more about what are the challenges and opportunities that we as young researchers, as young people, we can do here and we can do to change this. And I work in Yucatán, in the peninsula of Yucatán. I am based in the research center. I'm an ecologist, and I basically study plants. I have studied plants all my life, so I really love plants. But why? Like the main question is like, why we plant trees? Like, why are we interested in planting trees? Why do we do this? Why does Plant for the Planet focus on trees? So first of all, it offsets CO2 emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, by accumulating CO2 in the trunks, in their roots. They use this CO2 to build structures, and it's like fuel for them. So for plants, it's just like very easy to just do that and create forests. This accumulation helps us in regulating extreme weather conditions, also in conservation of biodiversity, as forests can have like thousands of different species of organisms. Moreover, it provides us food, not only to humans, but also to different animals, pollinators, and mammals. And finally, sorry, I'm have to. And it also works. They are also like recreation recreation areas, like, and very important recreation parks, like for humans. And they have like a cultural value and economic value for many communities. And many of them are important for so many cultures, like for example, for the Mayan people here in Yucatan, different types of trees are very important, not only for medicinal purpose, but they think these trees are sacred, and they try to protect us as much as possible. But we face different challenges. And the most important is that, like, in order to do something, the forest is so degraded right now that we don't know how, or we will have to create a strategy in how to help, and how to help how to do something. Because the water availability and the soil fertility are so damaged, we need to consider different things in order when we are trying to create and to do some strategies to rebuild them, to restore them. We are also facing the food insecurity crisis. Many places here, like here, for example, in Campeche is one of the states in Mexico that has the highest degradation, deforestation. So why there is this deforestation? Because people still want to increase the land area to plant for agriculture. So we are facing this problem now, in which we need to find places in which we can plant different crops. Why? Because the problem now is the extreme weather can damage our crops very fast. So this creates like an increase in the prices, and obviously bring us like a lot of food insecurity. And finally, there are these challenges of, like, when we have a lot of deforestation, the new emergences of diseases like Alexander and Susan and Njeri were talking about. One of the challenges that I think is the most important for us, at least for our scientists or young researchers, is create new strategies in order to fight against this, and think how we can do something different. So for us here in the research center, we have different activities that we do. We try to do some outreach activities in which we give presentations, and we work with the small communities. We work, for example, here today I'm in Constitución, one of the communities where we work, and we try to help people. We try to educate. We try to do some environmental education, but we also help them by doing this the restoration activities, by hiring them and giving them like a job and some income. We also try to do science communication, because we want to explain like all the information, all the research that is available for everyone. So we really like to post different blogs and share with people what way has been done, just because it's so important that everybody knows what is going on right now. And this information sometimes is not accessible to everyone. So it is highly important that we find ways in which we can share this knowledge. And finally, one of the courses that we do here in the research center is like we get involved in environmental research. We have our restoration site, and we, as many of you might know, Plant for the Planet focuses in planting trees. And we have developed different experiments in which we measure trees, and we measure the growth, we monitor the growth of the trees, because we want to make sure that the trees are growing in the best way possible. So we have developed a series of experiments in which we plant trees in different conditions, in different treatments, in order to understand what are the best treatments for their growth, or for their development, and have like a better restoration outcome. So for example, here you can see in the pictures, like we have the top picture is like this design of like this experiment of 16 hectares in which we have planted trees at different densities, and also the species at different densities, and also with different soil treatments in order to see and understand whether like these treatments help the growth and survival of trees. Other experiments that we do here are based in a shade house in which we grow also trees in different treatments of water and soil treatments in order to understand a little bit more about what could happen if we have a dry season and what are the outcomes of plants. So here you can see like all these beautiful trees with different stacks. So what we do is basically give them different amounts of water. Some of them have water continuously, others have no water, and others have like intermittent water, with the main aim to find out which of these species are the more resistant to drought. And we not only want to find these best species, but we also want to know whether these species can be adapted in long periods of time. So that's why we try to implement different strategies, like putting some enough soil from conserved areas or with different microorganisms in order to check whether this can help us to have like a longer survival rate. So here in the research center, we do these kind of things. I wanted to show you, this is very brief, and I understand we are running out of time, but really wanted to mention that our team here is growing, and we are aiming to help in improving the strategies for restoration. This is a tropical dry forest, and as we are facing every day with the climate crisis, we have different conditions. And the last year, it was a very strong year, not only because of the pandemic, but here in Mexico, we face different hurricanes, which brought us a lot of water, and with that, like many forests and many crops and many agricultural fields were flooded, and that was really bad for many people. So with all this experience and strategies, we are trying to improve what we do, improve like what we as scientists can do in order to make a difference. So thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, like about what you can do. You as young people can get involved in this type of research. And well, me and my team, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Anna, for this great presentation and for really opening our eyes on what we are actually doing. It's, as you said, it's not only planting trees, it's actually restoring the ecosystem, conserving the forest, taking in account so many complex, ideas and how really your work is so important for us. Thank you. Thank you and the whole science team in the Plant for the Planet area in Campeche. So thank you also for your to our audience. Thank you for your questions. We will now move ahead to our question and answer session. And we have many questions for our speakers. If you have any more, please go ahead and type them on the chat. You can make questions direct to one of our speakers or in general for all of them. So we will start with the ones that we have already prepared beforehand. And the first two go to Susan. One is from Amelie Schober, and she asked, when you were talking about taking into account restoration and in general, she asked and she said, do you think there is a risk to calculate everything in relation to restoration and forests in monetary value? And I would like to invite my friend Tiagotse to ask the second question for Susan that he made.
So the question was about, it's about a lot of restoration projects that's happening, around the world, led by the UN, or that's also by other groups. Are you concerned about the idea of models, in some of these projects? For example, you've mentioned the RED Plus, which was quite a success in a lot of areas, but also in some places they would have, some mixed opinion. So are you concerned about exporting models from what works in one region or country to the other?
Those are really good questions. Super good point about the monetary value. The right metric to use depends on who you're talking to. So what we find is that if there's the environment ministries talking to environment ministries, they all speak the same language and they understand and they appreciate the value of ecosystem services just from all different types of inherent human values. But that doesn't always translate well to other ministries that have other mandates. So if you're trying to explain to Department of Agriculture or Ministry of Treasury, then you may have to articulate the rationale with different metrics that will be more meaningful to that audience. Sometimes getting the private sector involved requires some bottom line kinds of convincing. But in other cases, we've seen a lot of examples, especially last year, where private sector was coming forward with commitments and real sort of energy towards trying to figure out how they can be part of the solution. So I agree that you're right. You can't use just a monetary value. It does feel like it's an oversimplification and it loses the point. But at the same time, you can't put a value on biodiversity. Although you can, when you're talking to someone about agriculture, help get their attention by explaining what it would cost if you didn't have pollinators, right? That kind of thing. So I agree that the value, the metrics to use depends on who you're talking to and what it takes to get their attention. And very good point about, what's the right model to use might be the one that you know the most about. And it is important that we learn as we go. So I think that's the key message is by involving as many different stakeholders in the conversation, we can understand perspectives and we can learn a lot. And we can improve as we try to translate one success to another area. But you'll always be missing something if you don't have the kind of inclusive process that allows all voices to come forward. So I agree with you. It's really important to learn as we go along and to use successful examples as the chance to try to build on those. Thanks, Paulina.
Thank you, Susan. We have another question, two more questions now, actually, for Mr. Alexander. One is from Amelie again, and she asked, what are the methods and structures to overcome global power imbalance and including indigenous peoples, etc.? The second question is from Michael, and he says, as it stands, please, what is the best approach to implement at the rural level?
For the first one, if we have any kind of instrument in place to increase participation, but also redistribute certain elements of power, of course, I can speak being at the International Convention, which is primarily and first of all the intergovernmental process. However, we have many different observers who represents all strata of society. And if we are talking about indigenous peoples and local communities, I would say that our convention is pretty unique, as we have a very strong element of our work specifically dedicated to recognition of traditional knowledge, traditional management practices, languages, and rights of indigenous peoples and local communities. We actually have a special program. And participation of those sectors of society in negotiation process, in providing information, sharing information, being part of the debate is a very important part of the process. And we try to strengthen it. And I also would like to say that many governments are very much engaged into helping doing that, whether through providing, for example, funding for representatives of those organizations and communities to attend international negotiations, sometimes including them actually into governmental delegations, but also having other elements of discussions and meetings. Because what's important, of course, not just to bring some of our stakeholders to sit at the meeting. If you like them to engage, engagement need to be meaningful, practical, and constructive. And that can be done also through various capacity building elements, but in a much wider scale, through definitely recognizing rights, interests, including education, and education starting from school. And again, we know I was working at my previous job on the Arctic issues, and I can say that youth in Arctic countries is especially very active. And there are also many processes where not only indigenous peoples who are in the Arctic are recognized actually almost as equal in negotiation process as governments. For example, in the Arctic Council, which brings together 8 Arctic states, no really decision taking without clear voice of support from 6 permanent participants who are indigenous organizations. So I think that this area is well developed in the convention. Some other stakeholders, we still need to find a stronger way to bring their voice, whether we are talking about women's organizations or we are talking about local NGOs. I'm probably less worried about big global international NGOs. They are always on the scene, they are always there. But if we really like to bring voice from the ground, that's also very important that we can provide support. And some organizations who may actually play a role of umbrella and bringing those organizations together and bringing their voice up in the international negotiations is extremely important. And the same for youth. Of course, I mentioned one organization, I'm in the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, but we need more, that they will be actually present and bringing the voice. And of course, there is also always element of some technical support and financial support. So on the rural part, that's of course further away from the convention. But for the rural part, again, for me, there is no silver bullet for any kind of topic. But if we are talking about those stakeholders, whether it's on the ground NGOs or indigenous communities, women's organizations, I think those are the most important partners for governments, but also for international organizations to actually translate whatever is a policy at national level or global level to the local level and do it on the ground and very much in rural areas. What is also important, of course, that it's not only translating from this global level, but we need to hear voice back coming from those rural communities, coming from the experience of working on the ground back to international negotiations, actually to engage governments, push governments, and inform governments in the decision-making process. So that's definitely need to be kind of like a two-way road. And again, civil society can play a very significant role.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander, for your words again. We have one more question. We have very little time, but I really wanted to make this question to Ms. Njeri. We had one question for you from Pius. Do you think we should integrate investing more in renewable energy, sensitization, and restoration, especially in the global south?
Yes, of course. It's not a question I can say no to. Yes, of course, this should be done. And as Alexander has mentioned, and I think Susan, this work can happen through the intergovernmental processes such as the Forum on Forests. I know one of the questions that I think one of the guiding questions that had been provided by you, Paulina, was on capacity development for major groups, particularly youth. And within the forum, we work directly with, as I pointed out, the national focal points and try and engage on capacity development and financing through the government or the respective ministries. So that's as much as I can say for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Njeri. And for the rest of you that have made more questions, also for Anna, we will send them to their emails and we will answer back to you as soon as possible. Thank you for your questions. Since we're running out of time, I would like to thank again our remarkable speakers for today. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Njeri. And thank you so much, Anna. Andreas is not here anymore, but thank him too. And yes, thank you, our amazing audience, for attending today to this great Youth Summit talk. It's the second talk of a series of different talks that we will be sharing with you in the next months before our great Youth Online Summit. And yes, thank you for attending the Forest Restoration Talk, Building Climate Resilience During the Decade of Restoration. Before leaving, and to say a second thank you to you, I would like to let you know, our great speakers, that each of you are going to have a certificate on 25 trees. We will be planting them in our land here in Campeche, Plant for the Planet. Anna will be in charge of that. Each of you will be receiving 25 trees. So we actually celebrate properly the International Day on Forests. And if you haven't, we would like to invite you all to download our app if you want to start from home and start planting trees. Go ahead and find us at plantfortheplanet.org or weplant.app, and you can plant trees from your home. Thank you again, and we would like to say goodbye to all of you. See you soon on our next Youth Summit talk. Bye-bye.